Hello again everyone, Ian Duncan, Rallycoach, back again for another short video. But before I get into this one, I just want to say a huge thank you for all of the comments and feedback from my previous video, where I gave an insight into my coaching mindset whilst I'm working with a driver, looking at things like your cognitive information processing, the limbic system, how your emotional responses can get in the way there and how we can work around them, and these super fast reactive responses that ultimately we're trying to construct to help you become more efficient in the car. So off the back of that video, I have had a personal request from @MaximumAttackRallying who would like to know a little bit more about the information gathering side of things, and that's what we're going to take a look at now. So what we're going to take a look at now are the information types. Where are we getting this information from? Okay, I think it goes without saying, as humans, we're going to use our senses, so to keep this video short, I'm going to focus purely on the visual and feel elements. So from a visual perspective, I like to give a driver 5 things, certainly at the start, until I know how well they process information. I give you 5 things very specifically to focus on. The first one is speed. Now, to again keep it simple, what I'd like you to pay attention to on the approach into a corner is how much speed or how much energy you're carrying in to that particular maneuver. Okay, that's a very important piece of information. It does get more complicated than that, but for now we'll keep it simple. The second is your distance. Okay, in relation to whatever it is you're going to do with the car next, how far away were you and how much time visually did you give yourself? And the only way you can judge that is by keeping a track of how much distance is ahead of you. If you don't keep track of that, then how can you possibly then change your visual cues? So it's very important that you keep track of distance on the approach. The third one is quite a complex one, and it covers many things, and I just call this, it's a blanket statement, surface. Okay, surface encompasses many things. It's not just what the surface is made of. Is it wet? Is it dry? Do you recognize it as being a high grip or a low grip surface? Are there any other influencers? Does it go uphill? Is it downhill? Is there a camber to the left or the right? Is there an obstacle in the way? What is your position in relation to your next maneuver? All of these things would come under surface, and you need to be able to remember all of them. Okay, it's really annoying. You might only be able to get 1 or 2 at a time, and then you would build on that. But what you're trying to do is capture data that is useful to you that you can then compare at a later date. And this is all very important stuff. The fourth one is weather. Okay, now weather obviously isn't going to change every single time you put an input into the car. However, over the period of a day or a series of days, if you're competing over a series of days, you need to be able to then judge quite accurately the influence that the weather is having, not only on the car but on yourself. Some people feel more comfortable in dry conditions as they do in the wet, and so on and so forth. During a wet, unseasonable day, your field of view might be severely reduced, and you need to know how to adapt your driving style to suit those things and still feel comfortable at the same time. From a coaching perspective, I like a driver to feel as comfortable on a hot sunny day as what the other way around really. I'd like to feel as comfortable on a cold, wet, sleepy day as what you do on a hot summer's day when there's loads of grip. That's ultimately what I'm trying to achieve. So the final one is hazards, and I throw hazards in there always purely because everybody reacts to hazards in different ways, and everybody perceives a hazard differently to the next person. So some people might just see a severity of bend as being a hazard, and others obviously see a large tree, a big rock or a precipice at the other side of a corner as being a hazard. It goes without saying, but because everybody sees and perceives a hazard in a different way and reacts to hazards in different ways, I like to try and pull that out and get through it, and obviously highlight the driver in a positive way, how to take ownership of those hazards so that you're not reacting to them in the way that you would have done before, because it goes without saying that a hazard will slow a driver down where perhaps it shouldn't need to. The more important element of that is that if you're focusing on a hazard, you're not looking at the part of the road ahead of you in the time frame to get the data that you need to actually put a valuable input into the car in order to negotiate that particular maneuver. So it's highly likely that you will run into problems purely because you're not capturing the data you need to then make a judgment call on what inputs to put in the car. So from my perspective, I like to train you to, yes, find the hazard, but then pass it to your peripheral field of view and try and allow that central focal field of view to pick out the data that you need to give you the means in order to make a judgment call on what input you're going to put in the car. That's very important. So the 5 visual things there: your speed, your distance, your surface information. There's quite a lot of information in there. The weather, just to be mindful of it. It's not going to change, as I said, in between each of your maneuvers. However, you need to have a good understanding of how it influences your surface, the behavior of the car, the behavior of grip levels, and how it influences your comfort and confidence levels. Then there's the hazards we've just discussed. Moving to the feel elements. On the approach into a particular corner, obviously you could be running through the process of positioning the car. You're going to be perhaps braking or even accelerating. It doesn't really matter. So all of these things are going to give you perhaps feel feedback information as to how much grip there is. However, I'm more interested at this moment in time that you're paying attention to these things. So one is going to be the timing at which you start to get the car moving, or the timing at which you start braking. These are very important things. So the timing of any of your inputs, hugely crucial. So you're going to ask yourself the question, when did I start doing it and what happened? Yeah. Next one is, how much effort did I put in? So this could be a steering input, a brake input, an accelerate input, or even a handbrake input in a rally scenario. You need to be able to measure how much effort you put in, okay? So how much effort you put in the brakes, how much effort you put on the handbrake, how much effort was there on the steering? How much of a range of movement did you use on each of those things, okay? So it's not just down to the effort, it's how far did it move. Certainly when you're trying to build a muscle memory, and we were talking the other day about having these systems of building a conscious awareness of something that works correctly, which then gets repeat and then will be built into one of these reactive response systems, which is really cool. They're really super fast, but it's only of any value to you if you understand what it is and you know it and you trust it and you've done it like 100 times and you know it works, and then it can be stored correctly. So the time at which you've done it, the range of movement you used, the effort that you've put in, and how fast that input went in as well. Very, very important. So you'll understand that the speed of application of your accelerator, the speed of application of brake, the handbrake, and the steering will all have a huge influence, not just on the direction or the speed of the vehicle, but they'll also heavily influence where the weight is in the car as well. And you can get away in certain scenarios with using higher speed inputs where the grip levels will allow over low grip. And sometimes you're trying to unbalance or unsettle the car, so you need to be quite violent and aggressive with the car to get the car to move around for you. But you need to capture that data and hold on to it so that you know whether something's going to work or not. And you have an understanding of, oh, I did that last time, so we need to change it and do something else the next time. So that leads us on to the next bit. So whilst you're on the approach, these are the things that you're going to be looking at. Whilst you're on the early stages of putting an input into the car, you need to be able to capture as much information from that as possible and store it and hold on to it. When you're in the turn, or whilst the car is going through that particular movement, you're still going to be looking visually. You're still going to be capturing data through feel, but it's for a different purpose. Okay, so these things are going to start proving or disproving what you've seen and what you felt on the approach. How much visual time did you give yourself? How much distance did you give yourself? Did you have the correct information visually about how much grip there was, so on and so forth? So you're going to use your visual and feel information through the turn to try and prove or disprove whether those things are correct, and if something needs correcting, then carry that motion out. So whilst you're mid-turn or you're mid-slide or you're going through a rotation in your rally car, you're going to be interested in still distance and speed. What is my distance relative to where I'm trying to get to? Where is my exit? How far away is it? What is my speed like? Have I scrubbed too much speed off through the rotation? What is the attitude of the car? Is my trajectory correct? All of these things visually are very, very important. And then you can start asking yourself, well, did I put too much effort in the speed? Was I too early on the turn? All of these things can be questioned then mid-corner, and they should be questioned every single time. So otherwise, how do you know how to correct it? How do you know whether to look further ahead or closer to the car next time you're coming into that particular bend at that particular speed? There's no other way of doing this accurately other than to be very consciously aware of all of this information that you're taking on board, and knowing what information to pay attention to at what particular time is also very, very important. So whilst you're mid-slide, again, visually, as I said, you're still looking at distance and speed. You're still going to be looking out for things like hazards and so on. But like I said, as soon as you spot them, pass them your peripheral and just make sure that, you're going to have a clear line through, making sure that you're looking ahead to get data. As you're mid-turn, the surface may change. It's not always going to stay the same. As like what you see on the approach. What you see on the approach might be nothing like what you have on the exit. You may be going uphill off camber or downhill off camber. It doesn't really matter. But you need to be looking ahead to such a point that you can capture that data so you can alter the inputs on the car to suit that change, and also confirm that, you know, that those inputs that you put in have been correct. So the feel element, very, very important here as well. Okay, they change a little bit because you're not really trying to get a feel through the steering or through the pedals or anything else. What you're trying to, there is an element of that, but what you're trying to prove here is the initial inputs that you put in, were they correct? So is the feeling of grip correct? Is the amount of rotation that I'm getting in the car correct in relation to what I saw in the way of grip levels, the incline, the decline, the cambers, whatever it is? Did I get it right? The reason you'll know that you got it right or not is whether you had to put a corrective input in or not. And this is ultimately what we're trying to get to. We're trying to generate a feedback loop so that you're capturing the right information at the right time, so that you know whether the inputs that you put in at the start were correct or not. But annoyingly, aside all of this, none of it makes sense until you understand a lot of things underneath it. So to start with, you need to understand the influence that your car itself has on grip, that the change in tires, the change in tire pressures can alter how much grip you have. The change in suspension setups can alter how much weight transfer you have. You need to be able to understand the outside influences, whether a wet track or a dry track is going to influence the car in some way. All of these things you need to have a knowledgeable, experienced background of before you can start actually capturing useful information in such a way that it's going to give you the data, the information you need to put a valuable input into the car. So it's a weird thing to say, but what I tend to do is I'll train a driver how to understand the movements in the car, the changes in the surface on the outside, long before I would ever expect them to pull in any information. And it sounds like a little bit of a back to front way of doing things, but when you look at it from a logical perspective, it makes perfect sense. You can't rely on somebody to gather in, as a good example, useful visual information when you're expecting them to rotate the car around on its axis in a rally scenario where they're not comfortable moving the sense of your field of view away from the windscreen. That's just not feasible. So you need to build up a confident understanding of other things like the physics and the science behind everything else that's going on before you start even contemplating asking somebody to pull this information in. So there is a step-by-step process to get to this point, and I think you can see that there is a logical process here of what you're trying to achieve. What information am I taking in? Where am I getting it from? To try and narrow down the time frame of you picking it out. Now, over time and through repetition, this again becomes a reactive response. So if your brain is used to capturing data in such a way, and it's using it over and over and over again in such a way that it is a very repetitive process, and you're consciously making it a repetitive process, your brain will actually train itself to do that on its own as a reactive response. And that happens much faster than you can do it yourself. But in order to get to that point, you have to train yourself to do it in the first place. And this is where I'm saying before that these reactive responses, these really super fast reactive parts of your brain where things are stored and then just called upon with a trigger, they happen so much faster than you can think yourself, and they can be reprogrammed. They can be trained for you to utilize at a later date, but they have to be built on solid foundation, and they have to be well understood to the point where you trust them, and trust them with your life, because ultimately you're out there traveling at ridiculous speeds, doing silly things in cars. Well, it's great fun. I really enjoy doing it. But you need to have a good, firm understanding and a solid belief that what you're doing with the car is actually going to be correct and carry you through to the other side of that particular maneuver. So this has been an insight into information gathering. I hope it's made sense to you. I hope it's perhaps add a little bit more weight to what I covered the other day. It's an interesting subject for me, and the reason that I find this so interesting is because every single driver is different and will approach this in a different way. So until the next video, this has been great. I've really enjoyed doing this one. Thank you very much. It's something you can see I get very passionate about, and hopefully it won't be too long before I do my next one. But for now, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.